Hello everyone, welcome to this debate arranged by Geo Media Organization, and I would like to welcome our guest speaker, Winthrop Rodgers, a journalist and researcher specializing in security, international relations, and post-conflict environments. Special emphasis on press freedom and human rights. His past work has appeared in foreign policy, the Index on Censorship, and Monitor, the Washington Institute, New Lines, and Rest of World. Today, Rogers is going to discuss about the Kurdistan region's deepening predicament. Right now, as you know, the Kurdistan region is in a bad political situation. The region is divided into KDP and PUK zones. And again, the two zones divided between two regional forces, Turkey and Iran. So our question is, how do you see the future of the region? And what are the problems and what are the solutions?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to talk with you all and to hear from you as well about your thoughts on this issue. It's really important one, and one that I think will have very big consequences that aren't yet clear. But I'm really glad that we're having this debate now. I'd like to thank Draw Media for inviting me. I'm very grateful to you all for this opportunity. And also, before I really get into it, I'd like to say how grateful I am to, there are a lot of Kurdish journalists and researchers and activists around the table and who might be watching. And I'm really grateful to all of you. You know, my work would be completely impossible without your work, without your insight, without your friendship and support. I don't think that you all get nearly as much credit as you deserve, and as much attention as you deserve. So, without your hard work and your bravery, it's impossible for the rest of us to understand what's going on and to have these kind of conversations. So, I really am very grateful to all of you for that. So again, we're talking about the current predicament that the Kurdistan region finds itself in, and there's lots of things to be worried about. Climate change, religious division, ethno-sectarianism, all sorts of things like that. But I want to focus sort of on four main points, right? There are the internal problems, political problems here in Kurdistan. There are problems between Erbil and Baghdad. There are economic problems within the Kurdistan region, both at sort of a top-line level, as well as economic problems for the people. There's fundamental dysfunction within the political economy of the Kurdistan region. And then the fourth is the foreign relations that the Kurdistan region has, and the dynamics. There are both good and bad things going on in those dynamics, but they're consequential. So I'll start out with the internal problems here, and with all due respect to the political opposition and everybody who hopes for democracy, authentic democracy in the Kurdistan region, it's the KDP-PUK duopoly that is really driving the bus here, that is in charge of the direction in which the politics is going. The decisions that are made by the party leaders, and again, it's a very much a top-down political system, have a huge impact. There are things that people can do in the opposition. There are things that people can do in the streets with activism and all of that, and that's really, really important. But the Kurdistan region as a political system, as a cohesive political entity, depends on the agreement and the cooperation between the KDP and the PUK to actually to function at this time. That's not to foreclose any kind of changes in the future, and in fact, what we're seeing right now is dysfunction, and that we should move beyond that to get to a more functional system. But for now, this is what we see, and we have to kind of deal with it as researchers and journalists. We have to deal with what we actually see here now. So as I don't need to explain to all of you that there has been this strategic agreement between the KDP and the PUK for a long time. It predates the current one that began in 2006 and goes back to 1992. Goes back further. This is a system. This is a relationship that is characterized both by cooperation and rivalry, and that kind of ebbs and flows. Sometimes they're better able to cooperate for certain reasons, and at times they're unable to. And right now we're going through a period where they seem fundamentally unable to cooperate, and this coincides with a new generation of leadership taking over in both parties. Right? We have Massoud still very much at the top of the KDP, but in less of a day-to-day decision-making role. He still plays a very important symbolic and practical role, but his son, Masroor Barzani, is very much in charge of the day-to-day and has, in effect, sidelined alternative centers of power within the party, whether those be sort of older ones like Fazl Mirani or ones closer like Nechervan Barzani. And so we're seeing really Massoud and Masroor as the deciding forces within the KDP at the moment, with Masroor being in very much a day-to-day role. So that's a new generation there. That's new leadership. Masroor has come at his position from outside of electoral accountable politics, right? He's come at it from a security background, from a deep security background, and that affects the way that he appears to view politics. And instead of showing some of the pragmatism that his cousin might have shown, he has taken a very hard line on a number of different issues, from public criticism and freedom of expression, to negotiations with other parties, to relations with Baghdad, to relations with the Kurdistan region's foreign partners, to dealing with the economy. He seems unresponsive to outside influence, which is proving very frustrating to the Kurdistan region's foreign partners and others, but is ultimately most frustrating to the Kurdish people, right? Who ostensibly exist in a democratic society and ought to have the right to and ability and capacity to affect decision making, and it doesn't seem to be happening. And we can hopefully discuss the reasons for that later. We also have a new generation within the PUK leadership, which sort of the party had drifted after Imam Jalal had his stroke in 2012, and went through a difficult and uncertain period for many years, and declined in relative power to the KDP. Part of the reason why this strategic agreement and this relationship between the KDP and the PUK worked more or less for a time is because there was some balance in that relationship. And as the PUK drifted, then the balance was thrown off. This new generation in the KDP felt that it was the preeminent power in Kurdistan and wanted to ditch the principles of 50-50 and balance and be the real decision makers across the whole Kurdistan region, across the whole Kurdish house. And now we're seeing some pushback from the PUK, and that's causing problems, right? we have Bafel Talabani, who has sort of progressively consolidated power within the party. Again, coming from a background that is not from accountable electoral politics, right? He's coming from partially a security background, but basically just sort of a party background with not a whole lot of responsibility. And now he's in a position where he's very much learning on the job, and in comparison to some of the other players in the PUK, doesn't have that frontline experience that a guy like Kubad Talabani has, or Kasrat Rasul, or some Mala Bakhtiar, or some others, right? But nevertheless, he is effectively consolidated power within the party. Really, only the Khosrat wing seems to be able to stand on its own within the party any longer, and they seem to be working together for now. But the PUK and the KDP, these new leaderships, see their strategies as pretty incompatible. The KDP wants to rule on majoritarian principles, on the principle that it is in charge of the Kurdish House, whereas the PUK is pushing back on that. It's hard to reconcile that. The sort of logical thing to do is to negotiate, to compromise, to find a way to work together in a way that they have done in the past. But for whether it's personal reasons, whether it's for reasons of interest, whether it's for business reasons, that doesn't seem to be happening anymore. This generation of leaders within the parties can't come together and work in the common interest. And that's bad, not just for sort of internal Kurdish politics and elite level negotiation and all of that, but that's bad for Kurdish citizens, again, right? If these guys can't even get it together to work together for their own sort of elite interests, how can we possibly expect them to work together in the common interests of ordinary citizens? And that sort of brings us to the economic problems in the Kurdistan region, right? We are seeing deep dysfunctionality within the political economy of the Kurdistan region. Obviously, this has a lot to do with oil and the effect of a rentier economy where the most precious economic activity, the most is controlled by a very, very small part of the population. And the mechanism for getting that money out into the population that had been relied on for a long time, public sector employment, is no longer functioning in the way that it had been or the way that it's supposed to, in a way where the government has said, yes, we'll give you a job, we'll give you a paycheck, that's the social contract. In return, we expect you to do X, Y, and Z, right? And that no longer is functioning. And so you have a situation where the money is not getting out from a practical point of view, but also the social contract that has defined the Kurdistan region is no longer functioning, right? Where at the very least, there is an interest for the elite to make sure that ordinary people can live a reasonable life, right? And that's no longer possible. And so without that consideration, the elite level, that top political level, is incentivized even further to not care about the ordinary people. And obviously the public sector employment, like is really important. And the government is the most important employer. It doesn't employ a majority of people, but for large sectors of society, it is the dominant employer. There was I think an IOM or UNDP study a few years ago that showed that around 70% of working women were in the public sector, right? That's super important. And so when that doesn't function, it goes out into the wider society. It affects people in the bazaar, the shopkeepers. It affects the private sector. It just means that there's not as much money in the system, and that really has a very deep practical effect on people, and it makes them feel certain ways about politics, right? And it breaks down the relationship between constituents and their leadership. You know, the political class can complain about the media causing problems between people and the leaders and all of that, but fundamentally it's decisions and actions and dynamics that emanate from the top that are really responsible. The media just reports on it, but it, you know, because it is really a factor of oil. That's, you know, where most of this money is coming from to fund the public sector. We also have to talk about Erbil-Baghdad relations, right? So this is linked. This disagreement over oil and revenue sharing has been going on for a long time. But we saw a period in the late 2000s where this deal, where the budget process kind of worked, where there were regular, legal, procedurally sound transfers from Baghdad to Erbil. And you saw Erbil start to grow. You started to see the Kurdistan region grow, right? You started to see the diaspora come back. But then political decisions start to get made. People within the KDP in particular, but throughout the political elite, start to think that doing independent oil exports is a good idea, right? And this is part of a larger political project, but they also realize that they can have greater economic control over Kurdistan if they have independent exports. And so in the late 2000s, you start to see the Kurdistan region walk towards this decision, which ultimately comes to pass in 2014, right, with the opening of the oil pipeline. And Baghdad responds by cutting off the budget transfers. Obviously, this comes at a very difficult time for Iraq and for Kurdistan with the ISIS war and an influx of refugees and all of that. But you also get this dynamic that then goes on for the next, basically until today, where Baghdad and Erbil accuse each other of not living up to their legal responsibilities in the budget whenever a budget is passed, right? Erbil says, you're not transferring the money to us that you're supposed to in the budget. And Baghdad says, well, you're not being transparent. You're not transferring the oil revenue to us. You're not opening your books to us. You are exporting oil independently, which we think is against our interests and all of that. So you have this he said kind of dynamic where both are correct in the fact that the other is not living up to their responsibilities, but both are doing this, and it's precipitated by a political decision in Kurdistan, right? That's not to say that Kurdistan doesn't have a right to manage its own affairs and make its own economic decisions and to export oil independently if it wants, but there are consequences to making that decision that are easily anticipated. And that then, once those decisions have been made, you have to manage, and they weren't managed, right? We could have had an oil and gas law a long time ago, but for lots of different reasons, this didn't happen. Kurdistan decided to do it in a different way. Baghdad decided to do it in a different way, right? And the consequences are ultimately borne by the ordinary people, by public servants and others, who no longer have this regular influx of cash, right? They do get some from the oil exports, but it's not enough. Erbil cuts salaries, doesn't pay salaries, promises, yeah, don't worry, we're going to repay these salaries, and never does, right? And this is a situation that's gone on for a decade now. There have been periodic agreements between Erbil and Baghdad to send money and that sort of thing, but it's always temporary. And it's always subject to Baghdad saying, yes, we will do this for you, right? That's not a guarantee. That's just a negotiation. Now we have a situation where Baghdad feels more stable. It's politically cohesive with the center of gravity in the new government surrounding the Shia coordination framework. You're seeing people who have always thought that the Kurdistan region has acted with too much autonomy, wanting to rein that in, right? There are this has been an alternative power center within Iraq for a long time, and now there's this. They have the capacity and the political will to reduce that, and they're doing that through the budget. They're doing that through the federal Supreme Court and decisions that intervene into the ability of the Kurdistan region to govern its own political and economic affairs, Erbil, in particular, is reacting. The KDP is reacting to it in one way, and the PUK is reacting to it in a different way. The PUK is saying, is in some ways seeing the writing on the wall and deciding to make a deal with Baghdad and be closer to Baghdad. This carries risk, of course, right? They go from being an equal or sort of a 1B status in Kurdistan to being a very small fish in a very big pond. And there's risk with that. But there's also risk in how the KDP is dealing with it. And we see Masrur's governing philosophy very evidently in how they're doing it. And a very hardline approach to dealing with Baghdad. Of course, he and parts of the KRG are going down and negotiating, trying to get the restarting of cash flows and that sort of thing. But the rhetoric that's coming out of Erbil, the way that Erbil is acting, the way that the KDP is acting in terms of boycotting elections and all of that is deeply unhelpful and really not particularly pragmatic. And so we see growing problems with Baghdad, which will probably, I'm not saying, no, we should just, the Kurdistan region should just do whatever Baghdad wants, right? But you have a problem that is being very poorly managed, in my opinion. And, the deal that could have been on the table some years ago, the deal that was on the table some years ago, is just going to continue to get worse as Baghdad gets more powerful and as the Kurdistan region becomes more marginal. Part of how it gets marginalized is foreign relations, right? Again, I don't need to tell you how important foreign relations are to the Kurdistan region. As a political entity, it in many ways is enabled by the role of foreign states, whether that's Operation Provide Comfort and the no-fly zone in the 1990s, the Washington Agreement in 1998, the removal of Saddam Hussein in 2003, the intervention against the Islamic State in 2014, the continued support from the West politically and economically, whether it's the decision by Turkey to allow independent oil exports in 2014 and to make deals with with the KDP for security and economics and politics, whether it's Iran and its relationship with the PUK and the KDP, frankly, on politics, right? Like those roles are very important. But I don't want to go too deeply into the specifics of them, but and particularly as a Westerner, I think it's important to note that I think what we're seeing, at least in terms of Western influence, is a gradual reduction of their ability, of Washington's ability, London, Brussels, Berlin, Paris, to influence the behavior of the Kurdish elite, right? Take, for instance, the referendum in 2017. Washington, all these places said, no, don't do it, it's a mistake, and it went ahead anyway. They say, reform the Peshmerga, unify the Peshmerga, depoliticize the Peshmerga. Here's a whole lot of money to do it, and it doesn't get done, right? Do elections, right? Until Baghdad has now stepped in and is essentially forcing elections to happen, the West was not able to convince the KDP and the PUK to put the mechanisms in place to have elections, right? And that's very frustrating and disappointing. In fact, I'll emphasize disappointing, because this is how I had a talk with a Western military guy. I was like, I bet you all are disappointed. He said, or I bet you all are frustrated. He said, no, we're disappointed. We're disappointed, right? We have a real partner in the Kurdistan region, but we're not seeing the kind of progress and dynamics that we want to see. And the effect of that is that places like Washington and London and Brussels and all of these other places in the West not only recognize that they don't have the kind of leverage that they need to affect policy and behavior, and so don't try, but also don't really want to try. Like, why should we constantly be in the middle of these guys when we can't do anything to help them unify, because they won't help themselves? So sort of just throwing your hands up and saying, look, we did what we could, but ultimately you here in Kurdistan are responsible for your own affairs, right? This is what you wanted, right? We're here to support you, but you have to actually get it done. And all four of these dynamics, the foreign relations and the impact or lack of impact that foreign countries have, the relations between Baghdad and the Kurdistan region, which seem to be in many cases increasingly antagonistic, the deep sort of economic dysfunction within the political economy of the Kurdistan region, and the elite divisions at the top of Kurdish politics are all combining to create a real predicament. You asked me to think of some solutions. I don't know what those are, man. Like, they are really elusive. And what is particularly troubling about it is that these are all dynamics that we have known about for a long time, right? Kurdish internal divisions. Like, come on. Like, this has been happening for probably as long as Kurds can remember, right? This is not new. Poor relations between Kurdistan, greater and including sort of greater Kurdistan, and the states where they live, whether it be Turkey or Iran or Iraq or Syria, right? Problems with that. This is something that is a very important part of Kurdish history and Kurdish politics, right? Economic problems, right? Resource curse, the influence of corruption, and all of that. These are problems that are well known and not unique to Kurdistan, right? And the sort of general position of Kurdistan as a semi-autonomous place that exists and was enabled by, in many ways, not to discount the role of Kurds in their own affairs, but the political institutions of Kurdistan that were enabled by foreign intervention. We've known about this for a long time. So all of these problems are so evident and have been evident for so long. So how do we solve it? I don't know. Is it sort of our responsibility to solve it as outsiders? No. I think that there is a real argument to be made for Kurds taking real charge of their affairs. Unfortunately, I think the political system that the elite has put in place prevents that from happening, and that's sort of another element of this. But it is a predicament that ultimately Kurds have to live with more than anyone else, and therefore I think it's there will always be people to help Kurdistan. There will always be people who want to harm Kurdistan, but the people who Kurdistan ultimately matters the most for are Kurds, and to that end, the solutions have to come from Kurdistan, from Kurds, and I don't think I'm all that willing to make too many suggestions that haven't already been made and aren't already well evident to people, like making a compromise within the political elite, or changing the political elite, making pragmatic deals with Baghdad, making pragmatic deals with your foreign partners, and instead of engaging in corruption and illicit activities, look to your people. Look to the economic and social and political welfare of your people. So I think that those are four very generally stated solutions, but ultimately it takes Kurds to do them.
Thank you very much, sir. You mentioned too many things in your presentations, about the internal factors to that very difficult situation in Kurdistan region. Of course, there's other factors in outside and external factors, but you mentioned to some things like the new generations. Of course, I am 100% with you. There is now new generation in position in Kurdistan regions, until we are far in from the first generations. When we are remember the times of the Mamjal al-Kak Mas'ud, sometimes the negotiation between the PUK and PDK was easier than today's, because the new generation, they need new strategic agreement, because they are thinking difficultly that their parents, for example, Mam Jalals and Kak Masud, because now the political parties in Kurdistan, before also and today's, there is related to the very great interest, that's oil and gas, and that political parties make a link to the external companies, multinational companies, and their interest that mixes with the interest of the PUK and PDKs. So the negotiation between the PDK and PUK now is so difficult than before, because there was before just about for example, the borders or about a village or somewhere else, but now is about the oils, very great interest, and many other countries. For example, last days there is attack on the Cormor's gas, Someone say there is maybe related to another country, region countries, because they don't want the gas exported from Kurdistan to Iraq, and they want to still bring in the gas from that country. Okay, so I think the PUK and PDK, in conclusions, they need more new agreement on that things. Okay, and another things you are said, they said could Baghdad and Erbil both are right. Okay, of course, both are right. And at the same time, both they are lying with the peoples. Okay, because the Iraq need more centralized. Kurdistan region, they need more decentralized. Okay, they want more autonomy, so much autonomy to that things. Okay, both they are. So I think we need an agreement too between the Iraqs and between Baghdad and Erbil about the many things. Okay, because that situation they are right in the institution 2005. That times was after the Iraq regime collapsed, and there is a USA was in Baghdad, was in Iraq, and now the situation are different. Okay, the region countries are coming into the Iraq, and they are influencing on the Iraq's government. Okay, more than before. So the things will be changed. Okay. Just one question for you: referendums. If we are not in that geographical place, for example, if there is not Iran beside us, will be the referendums problem for us? Or the referendums will be problem if we don't have a PUK and PDKs, because the problem is not referendums. Okay, the problem is relation between the PUK and PDKs. Okay, there is not unity in Kurdistan, as you said, in military forces, in economy. Even now will be different cultures. Someone said the parties. Okay. Cantoni Hizbi, okay? The parties canton, okay? Parties canton. For example, in somewhere else, we have an administrative canton, we have a political canton. Now here in Kurdistan, we have different types of that decentralized. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this discussion. I'd like to ask about your opinions on the critical situation of press freedom in Kurdistan region, because as you may know, as Metro Center, we have since its establishment in 2009, we have been fighting nonstop for the rights of journalists, specifically, and generally the rights, human rights. So I want to know your opinions, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your insights and analysis. My question would be, how do you see the future of KRG as a legitimate institution, especially when we take a look on the Erbil-Baghdad and the Shia coordination framework end goal of maybe its extreme coming back to the provinces? So we know, as you mentioned, that there are few mechanisms through the federal court or through salaries. So how do you see this is gonna evolve? What could be the future of KRG as an official, legitimate institution? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Win, for your presentation. I would like to react with not necessarily a question, but a comment. And to start from this idea that Erbil and Baghdad might need a new agreement. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I think there is no dimension where if a new agreement ever existed, Erbil could end up in a situation that is more beneficiary than the situation they have now. And this is highly related to what you were mentioning, and you were too, and it was implicitly mentioned by you too, which is if we have a broader look at the nation-state model, and it's not only in Iraq, there is the same question in Syria with Bashar al-Assad coming back to the international scene, reintegrating the Arab League. We have had the same also in Turkey with PKK losing more and more influences in the Kurdish areas. We are seeing the same here. And I think that the big comeback of the nation state, which can be very explicit since the 2017 referendum, which gave the opportunity to Baghdad to take back the disputed territories and to directly attack Kurdish autonomy, is one of the main elements that can also explain the growing tensions that is happening between PUK and KDP, because PUK for the last 20 years, and I don't think it was specifically a clever move from them, it's just the result of the strategic agreement, but they had to turn toward Baghdad because Jalal Talabani became Iraqi president, while KDP remain on this position, which was we are fighting for independence, which was not a possible stance for PUK since they had the president of Iraq, the presidency of Iraq position. And so the coming back of the state right now, from my perspective, also explains why KDP is isolating more and more. They have been disappointing the rest of their partners, and they have no choice but to welcome Turkey as the only legitimate ally they have right now. And while PUK has been strategically bringing Baghdad in the internal affairs of the Kurdistan regional government. So that was just to say that I think we can also take the perspective from the outside, which is the nation-state model, which seemed to decrease for a certain number of years, specifically after the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s, giving more space to non-state actors such as PYD in Syria by the beginning of Arab Spring, such as KDP and PUK, specifically after 2003. This period is coming to an end, and that leads me to think that I'm not very opportunistic regarding the future of Kurdish autonomy right now. I'm not sure that Baghdad will come after the full autonomy of the Kurdistan region, because I don't really think they have whole interest for it. They might give them or let them keep non-strategic sectors such as education, health system, but when it comes to resources control, probably in few years, military control, diplomatic representation, we might see Baghdad keep trying to transfer and centralize everything.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. One thing I will just sort of say about the centralizing influence you mentioned. I live in Scotland right now, and the Kurdistan region has been for a long time a rather unique example and case study of autonomy, right? You look at other examples like Greenland, Scotland, Catalonia, and others around the world, and Kurdistan had much greater autonomy. It had its military forces. It had foreign relations. It had basically other than money. It had its own oil policy, right? And part of this was enabled by the weakness of Baghdad, but also it was part of how the Kurdistan region was set up, and how the leaders of the Kurdistan region took an opportunity, right? And so, in some ways, we're seeing the Kurdistan region's status, sort of extra status, come back to a more recognizable arrangement that is common in places in Europe and elsewhere. So I think that's just part of it. So KRG is an institution. I'll sort of work backwards a little bit, but there's a lot of interrelated stuff here. So the KRG is an institution, its legitimacy, and then also the sort of general future and the elections are all kind of tied together, right? The KRG, I should note quite strongly, is a constitutional entity in the Iraqi constitution. It exists. It has rights, it has responsibilities, it has powers that are in the constitution. Whether they're clearly delineated and all of that is another matter, but it exists as an entity, right? And the future of that is really uncertain, not because it will be removed from the Constitution, but whether it functions, whether it has legitimacy and whether it functions. So, and does that functionality depend on a KDP-PUK bargain in some ways? Not necessarily, but in practice it does, right? If, and I'll get to the elections in a moment, like if the elections go bad, if the relations between the KDP and the PUK continue to deteriorate, and the PUK decides to get closer even more to Baghdad and request salaries be paid directly and all of that, then what are we left with? Like even in the Constitution, I think a region has to be three governorates, and there's a reason why that number was chosen, right? But it makes it very difficult to envision the KRG as a functioning entity with any kind of real power. But that kind of strikes at its legitimacy as an institution, right? Can it function with only half of what it had before? Like even if we take it sort of as a historical and experiential kind of thing, what does a KRG look like if it's just Erbil and Dahuk? Right? It's a real question. These are one of these sort of consequences, these risks that comes up. I guess I will talk about the election now. So there's a difference that we're seeing now in the post-FSC Federal Supreme Court decision in February, where and this goes back even to decisions that the court made in earlier. Baghdad is clearly in control of the process, right? The reason why there were postponements before was that in some ways the KDP and the PUK continued to be in charge of the process, right? Even though there wasn't a mandate for the regional election commission because it hadn't been renewed in law and all of that, there was still that path forward, right? They could have made a deal and renewed the mandate of the regional commission and gone to elections in October 2022 or December or whatever, right? But now that the process is outside of the control of the KDP and the PUK, of Kurdish self-governing institutions, the calculus is different. So the KDP is complaining, we were for elections for years and the PUK didn't want to have them. Yeah, that's true, right? That is true. But you guys were in charge at the time and agreed essentially to postpone them. Now you aren't in charge of the process anymore. Other people are making the decisions. And so you don't have as much of a say anymore. What they can do is either make a deal, which they didn't do, or they could boycott, which they've decided to do. And the decision to boycott is no longer affects the actual legal process of the elections, right? That's the KDP's choice. They can be in the election or they can be out of the election, but the election process continues. And that could prove to be a very big strategic mistake. It has to do with, and could very well undermine the legitimacy of the Kurdistan region. What does the Kurdistan regional government look like without the KDP? Again, like, this is a deeply anti-democratic kind of situation where the participation of one party or the other determines the legitimacy. No, like, the legitimacy should come from the people, but in reality it comes from this. In practice, it comes from this deal. And so, the goal of the KDP here is to delegitimize the process and delegitimize the result of the election and delegitimize whatever kind of institutions or political bodies, whatever comes out of this process, even though it is what has become the legal, legitimate process through court decisions, through parliament, and all of this. Again, we can debate, and there is absolutely room for criticism of what the Supreme Court is doing and how it's doing it and why it's doing it, right? But it's the court of last appeal. This is this is the process, right? And so it does speak to deep questions of legitimacy. But what happens if we don't have elections, right? What if the elections are postponed? Beyond discussions of what can the KDP negotiate for or whatever, and what can the KDP get out of a postponement? Like, elections are necessary for legitimacy here. I've written a paper for RUSI that should be published soon, I hope. I hope that speaks to this, right? Like, ideally, the popular sovereignty of people gives legitimacy to these institutions. In practice, it's different, but it's a conceit. It's a story that we all tell ourselves, right? And if that doesn't happen, then nobody can claim that these are legitimate institutions, right? The KDP can't claim that they're legitimate institutions. The PUK can't. The opposition can't. Baghdad can't. The Kurdistan region's foreign partners can't. How can Washington come over here and say, we have such shared values, when you're not having elections, when you're supposed to have elections and you're not having elections, right? That's not shared values. That's not something that Washington can deal with, or London or Berlin or even Russia and China. They need a legal process of legitimization that happens here. And without that, then the Kurdistan region deteriorates even further as an entity, right? If they're not going through the processes that are necessary for this to be a thing, then people both here and abroad will not see it as a legitimate actor, and will continue to work against its interests. So I think that there are huge risks for June 10th, whether or not it's getting postponed. I think it is going to go ahead because it's not in the hands of the KDP. I think that the momentum has started and will just continue on until it happens. And it's going to be an extremely messy process. It's going to be an extremely consequential process. But there are real issues of legitimacy and process here that have gone out of the control of the people who were in charge of it, and they're reacting in a way that further takes it out of their control. But it's going to be really, really messy, and I'm very much not looking forward to the results, because it will, there are already questions about whether the KRG is a cohesive political entity. And if these elections go ahead, or if they're postponed, we will know for sure that this is no longer a cohesive political entity. And the press freedom. The elites definitely need to do a better job and to be more responsible with their treatment of journalists from a sort of everyday point of view. I used to work at NRT and would go out with the reporters and all of that. And they're not treated well in the field by the authorities. They're prevented from going places and covering legitimate news events. They are sometimes attacked and detained and all of that. And those are things that need to be urgently addressed. The political authorities need to be more open to criticism. They need to be more open to debate and discussion. They need to be held. They need to put themselves forward to be held to account for their actions, right? That is their responsibility, and they're shirking that responsibility. Like, when was the last time we had a real interview with one of these leaders, right? We're sitting around here talking about huge developments. When was the last time anybody got a chance to ask Nashirvan Barzani or Bafal Talabani or anybody, like, what are you going to do? And then have follow-ups, right? But I think ultimately the biggest problem with press freedom in the Kurdistan region is the influence of partisan media and the difficulties that independent media organizations like DRAW and Paragraph and others have in actually getting the news to the people. The partisan media crowds out the space. They co-opt good journalists. They dictate the conversation and get all of the attention from foreigners, frankly, right? The U.S. government, for instance, right now has a program with Rudal. There's no to train journalists and that sort of thing. There's no reason that the U.S. government should be working with a partisan media organization for that purpose. And that would be a great opportunity for an independent media outlet to do that work. But Rudal's there, and so they do it. That's wrong. Funding is a huge problem for independent media organizations. It's a huge problem for media everywhere. But in this situation where partisan media has access to enormous financial resources and independent media doesn't, that creates a huge imbalance. There are groups like the National Endowment for Democracy, IMS, and others who are working to a degree to rectify that, but it's so hard to compete. And so I think that the problems with press freedom here are particular insofar as journalists should get beat up and arrested, and they should be able to work freely and critically, but it's also systemic, and those systemic problems, even if you solve the particular problems, the systemic problems will make it very difficult for journalists to actually do their job here.